The middle of Jupiter, the middle of the planets suite, playing a sample library orchestra in the notation program Muse Score. Gustav Holst uses a huge orchestra for this, his best known work. Not every instrument is available in sample libraries, not every sampled instrument is flawless, but after finding workarounds, adding dynamics, changing articulations, we can get a workable orchestral mock-up, and it's time to move on to interpretation. What does Holst want listeners to feel? We know he believed in music as a way to share emotion. He said, musicians express in sound what everyone feels. He referred to the planets as mood pictures. We know too there was some astrological inspiration for the work, yet the subtitles, the characteristics associated with each planet, are Holst's own. Jupiter's subtitle is The Bringer of Jollity, but does the theme we're listening to now really convey jollity? The Planet Suite abounds with puzzles and paradoxes, so how do we tackle them? First, we have to understand the shape of the piece. That's what this video is about. Later come deeper questions, seeing and hearing earlier interpretations, and trying new things. For now though, let's map the landscape. The score is one kind of map. When it's zoomed out, you can't see the individual notes, but you get a rough feel for what's being played where. Zooming even further gives a bird's eye view of the whole movement. Now, if we stretch it vertically, increase the contrast, add some instrument abbreviations, we get a first impression of Jupiter's overall shape. More helpfully, we can overlay on this scroll of scratches some shading to show what's going on where. The bit we were just listening to, the famous middle section, let's call it Thacksted, because that's what Holst called it when it was turned into a hymn. In the score, Thacksted happens here. I've coloured it mellow yellow and will use more intense shadings to show which parts of the orchestra carry the main musical idea. In Thacksted, the strings have the theme throughout. At the beginning, they're joined in the melody by the horns, before the horns go off to play harmonies, leaving the clarinets and a single trumpet to take over, later passing along to the oboes and flutes. Ultimately, the horns rejoin the tune. The highlights show the instruments playing this main musical idea. Other important things are going on too. For example, the harps here are playing accompanying chords throughout, and by the end, almost everyone who isn't on the melody is thickening the harmony. The only parts of the orchestra who don't play at all in Thacksted are the piccolos and most of the percussion. I always think of Jupiter as having three big themes. Thacksted is the biggest. Second biggest sounds like Thacksted's more lively cousin. It comes here in the first half and here again in the second. The melody is taken first by the horns and strings and then by the woodwind. I think of this as the Joybringer theme because of Manfred Mann's Earth Band.
I bring joy and I can take all those days when people seem to get to you. I bring joy and I come here.
The Joybringer theme in the second half of Jupiter repeats the instrumentation of the first. The third and final big theme comes here in the first half and here in the second. If you're Manfred Mann, you play this on the synth. Very 70s. Back in the planets, the theme appears first in the horns, then in woodwind and strings, then moves to the trumpets, then repeats again and again and again. With each repeat, Holst complicates the accompaniment, so by the time it's on its fourth, fifth and sixth time, there's a main melody, counter melody, flourishes and general mayhem. When this tune returns in the second half, there's a new set of instrument combinations as it's played 5 times more. What to call this section? Imogen Holst called it a mock folk tune, though perhaps a more common description is simply as a waltz. But all the notes are accented. There isn't really a waltzing lilt. If it's a dance, it's a clumsy dancer and they're getting faster and faster, like many folk dances, hurry-scurry. I think the Earthband boys had it right. It's the headbanger section. So now we have Thaxted in yellow, Joybringer in green and Headbanger in turquoise. But what's everything else? I think it's time for a metaphor. In the Jupiter landscape we have Headbanger heather, Joybringer juniper and Thaxted thistle. It's moorland, kind of wild, untamed, and around these three main species there are bits and pieces of grass, bracken, of course there's soil, loam, sand or clay, particles and fragments really, and maybe there's a spring bubbling up and tiny babbling brooks, because the remainder of Jupiter, the as yet unshaded section in our score, is a mixture of fragments, patterns, textures and some bubbles. Right at the start, the violins play this. Horizontally, each line is a repeating three-note upward motif that we've already heard and will come back to in a moment. Vertically, every semiquaver is 4 notes from a 5-note chord. You could call it an A minor 7th with added 4th. Rhythmically, the motifs are offset between parts and interact with the overall 4/4 beat. But the primary effect isn't melodic or harmonic or rhythmic. It's textural. It's elegant, economic and ebullient. I call it the bubble bath, not just because I love alliteration, but also because Holst uses it to bathe the beginning and many other parts of the white section of our score, usually while other things are happening too. The first other thing that happens is this fanfare. This appears in full in several places in Jupiter, but it also establishes a rhythmic fill pattern that pops up again and again in subfragments, usually on a single pitch. Then there are 3 seconds that go like this. In Imogen Holst's book on her father's work, the score reduction of these moments is the only musical quotation from Jupiter. Here's what she says. The very first tune sounds forced. The syncopation is calculated rather than felt. It would be impossible to move to it with the effortless abandon of a Purcell hornpipe. Almost every commentator has something to say about these 3 seconds. The YouTube channel, the Xylophone, calls them the sitcom theme. Rhythmically, it's a bit like the fanfare, but it functions in a different way. Apart from stabs and crashes, this is the only place in the whole work where the orchestra, or however much of the orchestra is playing at the time, moves as one. In honour of what Imogen says, I'll call this not a hornpipe. Next comes the sawtooth. It begins life as a tall sawtooth, played by the horns. The perfect fourth is Holst's favourite interval. So says Imogen, and that's echoed in Michael Short's book on Holst. And the tall sawtooth has it twice in a row, stretching upwards to a 7th, then dropping back to start at the bottom again. A few bars later, a sawtooth in the trumpet. This one's just as tall, reaching to a 7th, but the intervals are a 3rd and then a 6th. It's on the way to collapse because, a few bars later, the short sawtooth. The short sawtooth does a minor 3rd, then a major 2nd, then back to the bottom again. The short sawtooth is the Jupiter motif. A minor 3rd followed by a major 2nd doesn't just happen here, it's how Thaxted starts, how Joybringer starts, and it's the motif that repeats again and again in Bubble Bath. Here's the next tall and the next short. If I colour all the talls in red and all the shorts in orange, you see they're sometimes close, sometimes isolated, which again shows how fragmentary the landscape of Jupiter, except for the big themes of Thaxted, Joybringer and Headbanger. In most of the planets, something extraordinary happens in the coda. In Jupiter, A brief mysterious reappearance of Thaxted is quickly swept away by a fountain of tall sawtooths. In texture it's like the bubble bath, but with perfect fourths replacing the original intervals, so the bubbling is even more exhilarating. One last fanfare snippet, not the whole fanfare, just a one-pitch rhythmic fragment, then triumphant tall rising fourths to finish. Thanks for watching and listening. Coming next, I'll look at how Imogen Holst provides the key that unlocks Jupiter's mysteries.